Playing the Spy class in TF2 was a remarkably close, razor-thin balance of riding the highs of being a silent and deadly killer that tops the scoreboard underneath the hail of bullets and bombs, or the ultimate catalyst of becoming champion of the respawn timer. I don't think I'm delivering a news flash to anyone when I say that Spy is by far the hardest class to master out of all 9 options you have. A skilled Spy player is an unusual variant amongst a sea of unique Spies, and a large part of said skill is made up of the absolute mastery of his toolkit through hours of practice and time. His primary, secondary, tertiary, and even 4th weapon slots might not have as much variety as his contemporaries, but which option you choose for each slot drastically alters how you play. Stealthy options like the Your Eternal Reward and Cloak and Dagger emphasize the Spy's silent killer abilities to make him untraceable in battle. Contrarily, Spy can exchange some of his invisibility and secrecy for raw DPS if he needs it in a pinch. The ferocious power of a snowballing Diamondback amped up with several crits and the survivability of the Deadringer both come at the cost of blowing out your eardrums and alerting everyone this side of the Maritimes that you're using one of those items. But what if I told you there was an item that touched up both sides of the spectrum? Something that had a built-in feature that allows the sneaky Frenchman to slip away under the covers of Badwater undetected once its requirements have been met, but something that leaves a frosty calling card during standard use that alerts the enemy team of your presence upon a successful backstab. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to the curious case of the Spy-Cicle. The Spy-Cicle is something strangely enigmatic and unmatched in all of TF2. It's one of the only weapons that remains nigh the same upon its initial release, but remains as something I would argue is semi-obscure compared to its sister knives like that of the stock knife and this piece of hell on earth. Anecdotally, how often have you seen the Spy-Cicle used in regular gameplay? I don't typically see it equipped on anyone more experienced than the average gibbous who's just obtained it from a random item drop. But why is that? Well, for starters, let's examine the weapon's history and stats. The Spy-Cicle was added into the game in December 5th, 2011 for the Australian Christmas update. Since then, it's remained basically exactly the same, unless you deem it using the stock revolver taunt significant enough to mention. In damage and range, it is exactly identical to every knife in the game. 40 damage for face stabs, backstabs or insta-death, so on and so forth. Here's where things become interesting. The Spy-Cicle acts as a sort of escape route against pyros. Any contact with any sort of fire, including any of Pyro's flamethrowers, flare guns, the sharpened volcano fragment, Heavy's Hulong heater, and I think even the sniper's flaming huntsman arrows, renders the Spy-Cicle completely unusable for 15 seconds. The upside of this effect is that you gain 1 whole second of complete immunity to all fire damage, and Afterburn Immunity for 10 seconds, as well as being able to shorten the recharge time with ammo packs you might find. The intended use for this weapon should likely become immediately clear. It is something to avoid pyros with rather than take them head on, which doesn't entirely do Spy's wonder in battle. The only actual positive of this weapon is that something that only activates once you're being sprayed down by the hot hose of your worst enemy on the battlefield, which is not typically a position you would want to be in or even need to be in if you can aim your shots with a gun. Spy is the class that works best undercover, picking off vulnerable targets and escaping with the heat with precise movements and thorough map knowledge. He isn't the class that's capable of just tanking damage and brute forcing all encounters, unless you use the Diamondback and Deadringer, but that's a whole different can of worms. The whole idea of the Spy-Cicle is that its upsides rely on being caught off guard or being outmatched in a singular situation and providing an escape for you, but with an incredibly harsh penalty that I don't think entirely makes up for it. Losing your knife, i.e. one of your 2 weapons, is a monumental disaster for the heat of the moment fight during a game that forces you to switch only to your gun in order to deal any damage. The Spy-Cicle demands that you be a quick enough thinker to improvise a way not to die when fighting pyros. Heavies with the Hulong heater don't pose nearly as much as a threat as pyros because you can just jump over the fire ring and earn a backstab. It's not too much of a stretch to assume you'll end up losing the knife to some brainless pyro idiot just spamming scorch shot flares across the map, which means you either must scramble for the next health and ammo pack to recharge, or just go back to spawn. God forbid if you ever get caught by a particularly paranoid pyro flaming you down with the flog. The Afterburn Immunity is a decent perk when you're trying to escape the pursuing pyro, but you'll take full fire damage after the 1 second of immunity is up. And when you inevitably switch to your revolver and try and fight back, then you've already been roasted to death, or you will be soon with how long it takes to kill a pyro at point blank range depending what gun you're using. However you look at it, the only way to effectively use its upsides is if you play incredibly conservatively and carefully, only striking when necessary, not taking daring risks for backstabs or building sapping. And in the game's current lifespan, you have a better chance of unboxing a burning team captain than finding a Spire player willing to take things slowly and not rush into battle for epic trick stab montages. There's a sharp learning curve that asks you to drastically change your playstyle in order to comply with some not so useful upsides, but that's what just the blue text of the weapon says. This sharp stalagmite comes with this deadly side effect. Every time you earn a backstab, it turns your victim to ice. Even with ignoring the kill feed, this is a screaming notice to everyone on the enemy team that, hey, a spy just backstabbed someone, which puts people on more high alert. Not really a fantastic aspect for a class designed for one-on-one stealthy encounters, especially since a lot of players are willing to chase spies to the end of the earth to get you. A body left over from a typical backstab, ignoring the Your Eternal Reward, doesn't have nearly as much as a distracting calling card, which I suppose is a trade-off for the weapon's supposed stealth upside? I've explained how the benefits really aren't that beneficial in the first place unless you're able to get the drop on a pyro and take him out with your revolver. And speaking of revolvers, what revolvers work best with the Spy-Cicle? Since the blue text advantages of this weapon are only in effect when you're restricted to your primary weapon, it's a crucially important decision to make. The stock revolver is reliable, efficient, and an incredibly safe choice. As long as you can hit your shots consistently, you won't be disappointed. There's some stronger choices that specialize in different encounters, but stock will always do when you want it to. The L'étranger is something strictly used for stealth. Its noticeably lower DPS discourages you from anything more than a tool just to gain cloak to escape encounters or to finish off an extremely weak enemy. The Ambassador is quite useful tool to use in conjunction with the Spy-Cicle because of how close you have to be an enemy in order to have your knife melted in the first place. Discounting any rogue flares your way, swapping from your knife turn puddle into a point-blank 102 damage ambi headshot to body shot combo is incredibly effective against pyros. Or any light class for that matter. If the worst case scenario happens and you lose your knife to a heater heavy on the payload cart, just get out of there, it's not even worth trying. The Enforcer is probably your worst option to use as a combo gun. The entire point of the weapon is to take advantage of the resistance piercing and a boosted shot when you're disguised, which fades after one use. If you're in a situation where your knife is melted and you have to rely on the Enforcer, a single damage boosted shot simply doesn't add up to what the Ambi or even the Diamondback can do. Speaking of, the Diamondback is just stupid. If you have even one crit stored from something as basic as a backstab or building sap, then you have the most basic ability to aim a gun, then you're almost guaranteed to kill from anyone. The only thing you'll lose using this weapon is your self-respect. There isn't nearly as much as depth to your choice for Invis Watches. Stock, and to a lesser extent the Cloak and Dagger, emphasize you getting the hell out of that fight. The only benefit I can think of is the Desperation for Ammo pack the Cloak and Dagger carries also benefits the Spy-Cicle's meter because you can both draw from the same ammo pack at the same time and recover. Dead Ringer, however, the Dead Ringer can do everything the Spy-Cicle can, but better. The knife's Afterburn Immunity squeals in comparison to the overwhelming crutch the Ringer can provide for any type of damage at all, with the benefit of not losing one of your only weapons. It doesn't really stack well with the Spy-Cicle to use both items in conjunction, which is probably a good thing. As if the Dead Ringer wasn't already enough of a crutch, having that much of a get-out-of-jail-free card against pyros is probably a wiser choice balance-wise. So it feels like I've been harshly targeting and picking apart every aspect of this little frosty stick, but I've neglected to mention something obvious until now that flips the entire purpose and balance of the weapon on its head. What if the enemy team has no pyros? If you have no fire damage to worry about, then nearly every downside and upside of this weapon becomes completely and utterly irrelevant. Aside from the icy backstab victims, the Spy-Cicle essentially becomes the stock knife in all but appearance and taunt kill, which makes using it almost a cosmetic choice in whatever servers happen to have no pyros. It's kind of baffling to think about how many weapons exist solely to combat against pyro and fire damage, but how few of them have any other benefits aside of that. The Darwin's Danger Shield becomes worthless if there's no threat of fire, and the Sun on a Stick for Scout only has the benefit of critting burning players, which still requires a Pyro or a Huolong Heater Heavy to be on the same team. The Spy-Cicle exists in such a gray area that few other weapons can occupy. All at once it's poorly suited for its strength, but also becomes nigh identical to stock and under certain conditions. Is it a bad weapon? A good weapon? Situational? The Spy-Cicle simply is. In times like these, we must look into more obscure forms of gameplay to get the deepest scoops. In medieval mode, the Spy-Cicle grants its immunities but remains in the spy's hand and functional until you switch to your disguise kit, which is effectively going civilian pose. This can't be achieved in regular gameplay because Spy can always pull out his sapper to prevent his model from freaking out. I have no idea if this is glitch or intended feature, but it's medieval mode, and Spy is kind of a meme in that mode, so why bother? I think it's also easier to go civilian mode in MVM, but recording the footage of MVM is like pulling teeth, so you're gonna have to trust me. So, that's the Spy-Cicle. Upon gathering all the footage and using it as extensively as I have, it all feels a little underwhelming. So how would I go about fixing that? Taking a page from Bad Weapon Academy's book, I want to suggest a potential fix or added feature to better balance the weapon for casual gameplay, hopefully to get more people to use it. My suggestion? Just give Spy vaccinator resistance against fire instead of Afterburn Immunity. Keep the weapon melting away for the same amount of time, but just change the benefit. The vaccinator might be the most irritating weapon in the entire game used by players who can't function in life without a pocket soldier or heavy, but when the effect is damage activated and also takes away the weapon, I believe it would be a lot more useful and fair to fight against. Giving the Spy a huge resistance to fire allows him a lot more time to take down pyros with this revolver of choice and escape the scenario with a kill or with his life. But the pyro can just as easily switch to a shotgun if he has one equipped, or a melee weapon to attack the Spy. This changes encounters to me much more interesting with improvisation on the pyro's part and gives the Spy a more incentive to face pyro in battle for more interesting encounters. I could easily see a scenario where the Spy intentionally get hits with fire just to activate the resistances to take down the single pyro, but that leaves him so much more vulnerable to every other class in the game, which would stick true to his picked class gameplay. That's about the only scenario I can think of that would be reasonably adapted by Valve without delving into brand new game mechanics and assets, and a whole heck of a lot of work to portray on my end. I'm very curious to see how people feel about the Spy-Cicle. Do you agree or disagree in my sentiments with the weapon? Do you feel I've missed a mark on an aspect or felt I haven't considered something I probably should have? I encourage you to comment your thoughts down below, and like and subscribe if you thought the video was nice and wish to see more content from me. 2022 was a pretty nasty content drought on my end, but I've vowed to take this channel much more seriously for 2023, and once this video is finished and uploaded, I'm going to work on the next one right after. Until then, Hood Night, Street Dreams.